What happens when Britain's most beloved morning host comes face to face with a royal who refuses to play by the rules? Viewers found out last night when Prince Harry sat down with Lorraine Kelly, and what began as a warm chat quickly spiraled into one of the most explosive television moments of the year. Behind the cameras, tensions had already been simmering. By the time the broadcast ended, viewers were stunned and social media was in complete meltdown. The day had started like any other at ITV Studios. Lorraine Kelly's trademark warmth filled the air as she opened her show, her cheery Scottish lilt welcoming millions of viewers. The production team had been buzzing for weeks about landing Prince Harry, a guaranteed ratings boost and headline magnet. But no one could have predicted how swiftly this interview would veer from polished professionalism to a full-blown PR disaster. As the familiar opening music faded, Lorraine's smile masked what insiders later described as quiet unease about Harry's recent media tactics. The Duke of Sussex had made a string of controversial remarks in recent appearances, and the team suspected today's might be different. "Good morning, and welcome back to the show," Lorraine began, her eyes twinkling. "I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Prince Harry, who's here to discuss his latest charitable initiatives and his ongoing work in mental health awareness." The studio audience applauded enthusiastically as Harry took his seat opposite her. Dressed in a navy blazer and open-collared shirt, polite smile firmly in place, though tension flickered in his body language. "Thank you for having me, Lorraine," he said, his tone a mix of royal formality and Californian ease, a combination that had become his signature. For the first few minutes, everything went smoothly. Lorraine steered through questions about his charity work and new projects, her effortless balance of warmth and probing keeping the conversation engaging. It seemed the interview would follow the tried-and-true Lorraine formula: insightful, friendly, and safe. Then came the pivot. "Your work with veterans has always been close to your heart," Lorraine said, leaning forward. "Can you tell us about your new initiative?" Harry's response was steady and well-rehearsed, all about service, sacrifice, and supporting those who served. But Lorraine, ever the seasoned interviewer, sensed something deeper brewing beneath the surface. Her questions grew more personal. "You've spoken before about the challenges of leaving military service," she continued. "How do you reconcile your current lifestyle in California with the values you learned in the forces?" The question was mild on its face, but the effect was immediate. Harry's jaw tightened. "I think that's a rather loaded question, Lorraine," he replied, his voice edged with irritation. "My commitment to service hasn't changed just because I've built a life elsewhere. If anything, I serve in ways that feel more authentic to who I am now." Diplomatic words, yes, but the tone said otherwise. Lorraine, reading the shift instantly, didn't back down. Years in the business had taught her how to ride the wave when an interview turned turbulent. Her smile remained fixed, her tone calm but firm. "Of course nobody's questioning your commitment," she said evenly, "but surely you can understand why some people find it difficult to reconcile your criticism of the British media and the royal institution with your continued use of your royal title in business ventures." The air in the studio tightened. Even the audience fell silent. Harry's answer came fast and sharp. "I think you're conflating two completely different issues," he said, sitting taller, voice clipped. "My title is part of who I am, just as my commitment to speaking the truth about harmful institutions is part of who I am." And with that, the temperature in the room changed entirely. "I won't apologize for either." The words landed heavy, their weight far greater than their simplicity suggested. Lorraine caught the flicker of real emotion behind Harry's carefully media-trained composure. For the first time, the mask was slipping. "But surely you can see how that might appear contradictory to some people," she pressed, her tone still impeccably professional but edged with steel, the unmistakable signal to longtime viewers that Lorraine Kelly was not about to let this go. "You've made serious allegations about how you were treated, yet you continue to benefit from the very system you've criticized so harshly." The temperature in the studio seemed to rise several degrees. Harry's composure, once immaculate, began to crack. From the sidelines, his media handlers exchanged anxious glances as his posture grew rigid, his jaw tense. What had begun as a routine promotional chat was now careening toward something far more combustible, and everyone could feel the point of no return approaching. "I think you're oversimplifying a very complex situation," Harry snapped, his voice lifting above the calm register that had defined the first half of the interview. It's easy to make judgments when you haven't lived through what I've lived through. The implication was unmistakable. Lorraine's expression hardened ever so slightly, the only sign that his veiled accusation had hit a nerve. And then came the moment that would dominate headlines for days. Lorraine, decades of broadcasting experience sharpening her instincts, leaned in, her tone softened, that deceptively gentle lilt she used right before delivering a devastating blow. "Harry," she began evenly, "let's talk about something that I think a lot of our viewers are genuinely confused about. You've spoken repeatedly about wanting privacy for your family, yet you've also signed lucrative deals with Netflix and other media companies to share intimate details of your private life. How do you square that circle?" The question hit like a thunderclap. Harry's face flushed, and for a fleeting second his practiced media veneer dissolved completely. The studio fell into a silence so deep that even a breath seemed intrusive. "That's a completely unfair characterization of what we're doing," he said, his voice tight with anger. "We're sharing our story on our own terms, not having it twisted and sold by a predatory media machine." Lorraine didn't miss a beat. "But you are selling it, aren't you?" she countered, her journalistic instincts now in full command. "You're literally selling your privacy, your family's stories, your personal struggles, and doing so for millions of pounds, all while condemning the very media you're partnering with. Surely you can see why people call that hypocritical." Her delivery was calm, devastatingly calm, and that made it hit even harder. Harry's response was instant and raw. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about," he snapped, his composure finally breaking. "You sit here in your comfortable studio making judgments about things you could never understand, about pressures you've never faced. It's easy to be sanctimonious when your entire life hasn't been dissected by tabloids since the day you were born." The words hung heavy, the air charged with electricity. Lorraine's expression cooled, the warmth drained from her tone. "I may not be royal, Harry," she said, her Scottish accent sharpening as her own emotions began to surface. "But I've been in this business for over 30 years. I've interviewed thousands of people, many of whom have faced far greater challenges than you. And they've done so with grace and dignity, not constant complaints about how hard their lives are." The rebuke hit its mark. The audience, sensing history in the making, held its collective breath. "Grace and dignity," Harry repeated, his tone dripping with disdain. "Is that what you call this ambush? Is this your idea of dignified journalism? Bringing me on under false pretenses just to score cheap points with gotcha questions?" The accusation sliced through the tension like a knife. Lorraine's professionalism faltered for the first time as her own temper flickered to life. "Nobody brought you here under false pretenses," she fired back, her voice rising a notch. "You came here to promote your work, and I'm asking legitimate questions about the contradictions in your public statements. That's what journalists do, Harry. It's called accountability. Something you seem to have forgotten exists since you moved to your California mansion." The sarcasm in her final words was unmistakable. Harry's expression darkened. "Don't you dare lecture me about accountability," he shot back, his voice booming now, every syllable captured in sharp clarity by the studio microphones. "Where was the accountability when your industry destroyed my mother? When they hounded her to death and then profited from her funeral? You want to talk about hypocrisy, Lorraine?" He leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Look in the mirror." The invocation of Princess Diana's name sent a visible shockwave through the studio. For a moment, even the air seemed to hold its breath. Lorraine's expression hardened, the warmth gone from her face, replaced by something colder, something close to anger. "That is completely out of line," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just been pushed too far. "My industry. I've spent my entire career trying to bring dignity and respect to broadcasting. Don't you dare tar me with the same brush as the tabloids you're so fond of attacking when it suits your narrative." The exchange had turned deeply personal, the kind of raw confrontation that made everyone in the room instinctively uneasy. Camera operators shifted in their seats. Crew members exchanged nervous looks, and even the studio audience seemed to shrink back from the rising storm. Harry leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, his voice laced with disdain. "Oh, please," he scoffed. "You're all part of the same machine. You pretend to be different, to be better, but at the end of the day, you're all feeding off the same toxic system."
The only difference is that you've learned to do it politely. The insult landed with surgical precision.
Lorraine's eyes flashed, anger now unmistakable. "How dare you?" she said, her voice trembling only slightly, with fury, not fear. "I've built my career on treating people with respect and dignity. I have never ambushed a guest, never betrayed a confidence, and never profited from someone's pain. If you can't handle being asked simple questions about your own contradictions, then perhaps you're not ready for public life." Her words cut deep, and Harry's reaction was instant and explosive. "Not ready for public life?" he repeated, his voice rising to a shout. "I was born into public life. I didn't choose this, it was forced on me. And I've spent my entire adult life trying to serve while protecting my family from the same fate that killed my mother. If you can't understand that basic human desire, then you're not the journalist you pretend to be." The accusation struck like a hammer. Lorraine's composure faltered for the first time, the professional veneer beginning to crack. The tension was unbearable. The crew kept filming, but their expressions betrayed disbelief. They were no longer documenting an interview. They were witnessing an implosion. The audience sat frozen, caught between fascination and discomfort, aware that they were watching television history unravel in real time. Neither Harry nor Lorraine seemed to realize it, but the confrontation was about to reach its breaking point. Lorraine, her face flushed and jaw set, rose slightly from her chair, her eyes locked on Harry's with steely resolve, the kind of determination that had made her a national institution. "You know what, Harry?" she said, her voice slicing through the silence. "I've had enough of this entitled nonsense. You come onto my show, insult my profession, attack my integrity, and then play the victim when I ask perfectly reasonable questions about your own contradictions." The words hit like a slap. "Entitled?" Harry shot back, his voice rising, the aristocratic edge cutting through the air. "You want to talk about entitlement? You've made a career off the royal family. Every wedding, every birth, every scandal. You sit there commenting, analyzing, profiting, and now you lecture me about privilege?" His fury was sharp, almost regal, and it electrified the room. "That's absolutely enough," Lorraine snapped, her Scottish accent thickening with emotion. "I've covered royal events because that's what the public wants. And I've always done it with respect, with dignity. But I will not sit here and be insulted by someone who spent the past 5 years tearing down the very institution that gave him everything he has." Her words had the, finality of a gavel strike. Harry shot to his feet so suddenly that his chair skidded backward, clattering against the set. The abrupt movement sent a ripple of alarm through the crew. "Gave me everything?" he shouted, voice cracking under the weight of rage and grief. "You think they gave me anything?" The moment hung suspended in the air, electric, dangerous, unforgettable. "That institution cost me my mother," Harry said, his voice shaking but resolute. "It cost me my mental health. It cost me any chance of a normal life, and now you sit there safe in your little bubble telling me I should be grateful for the privilege of being hunted like an animal by your colleagues in the press." His voice broke on the last word, but instead of softening the atmosphere, the outburst only hardened it. Lorraine's eyes narrowed, her composure turning to steel. "Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become," she said quietly, but with the precision of a scalpel. The line landed like a physical blow. The audience gasped, the sound sharp and collective, cutting through the silence even over the studio microphones. Harry froze, his face drained of color, then flushed with anger. "How dare you?" he whispered, his voice low, almost trembling with contained fury. "How dare you presume to know what my mother would think? You didn't know her. You never met her. You're just another vulture who's built a career feeding off her memory." The accusation stung, but Lorraine didn't back down. Her jaw tightened, her voice steadied. "I may not have known her personally," she replied evenly, though emotion crackled just beneath the surface, "but I know she raised you to treat people with respect, to serve your country with dignity, to put duty before personal gain, and everything you've done since leaving Britain has betrayed those values." Her rebuke hung in the air, precise, cutting, and unanswerable. Even Harry seemed momentarily stunned into silence, but it didn't last. "You sanctimonious, hypocritical," he began, voice rising, but Lorraine's hand shot up sharply. "No," she cut in, rising from her chair to face him head-on. "You don't get to come onto my show. Insult everything I stand for, attack my profession, and then throw a tantrum when you're held accountable for your own behavior. This interview," she paused, her gaze fixed firmly on him, "is over." The words reverberated through the studio with chilling finality. "Fine," Harry shouted, tearing off his microphone so violently that the speakers shrieked with feedback. "This is exactly why I left this backward, small-minded country in the first place. You're all the same. Petty, jealous, and completely incapable of understanding anyone who dares to think differently." He hurled the microphone onto his chair, the crack of plastic against metal echoing in the stunned silence. "Security," Lorraine said, her voice calm but unyielding. "Please escort the prince off the premises. This show has standards, and he clearly doesn't meet them." The cold authority in her tone hit harder than any insult. Harry blinked, momentarily stunned. "You're throwing me out?" he asked, disbelief overtaking rage. "You're actually throwing a member of the royal family off your little morning show?" The incredulity in his voice revealed more than he intended. That even now, for all his talk of equality and independence, he still expected privilege to shield him from consequence. "I'm not throwing out a royal," Lorraine said coolly, her control returning with every word. "I'm removing a rude, entitled guest who's shown complete disrespect for me, my team, and my audience. Your title doesn't give you the right to behave like a spoiled child." The rebuke was calm, precise, and devastating in its restraint. Security stepped forward. Harry's face cycled through anger, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally a flicker of something like desperation. "This," he shouted, gesturing toward the crew and audience, "is exactly the kind of treatment that drove us away from this country. Small-minded people with small-minded attitudes who can't handle anyone who refuses to bow and scrape to their outdated expectations." Lorraine didn't flinch. "The only thing outdated here," she said, her voice sharp as glass, "is your behavior. Now please leave my studio before you embarrass yourself any further." That was it. The breaking point. Harry straightened his jacket, his movements sharp, controlled. A last-ditch attempt to reclaim dignity. "You'll regret this," he said, turning toward the exit, his voice thick with fury. "This isn't over." "Yes," Lorraine said quietly, her gaze unwavering. "It absolutely is." He hesitated for a heartbeat, then stormed out, trailed by his handlers and 2 security guards. The studio doors swung closed behind him with a heavy thud. A stunned silence filled the space. Lorraine exhaled, collected herself, and, impossibly, turned back to the cameras, slipping seamlessly into her familiar on-air tone. "Well," she said, her voice smooth again, though a faint tremor lingered beneath the surface. "That was certainly unexpected. When we come back after the break, we'll be talking to local hero, Mrs. Henderson, about her charity work with abandoned cats." The camera lingered on her composed expression, just long enough to catch the flicker of exhaustion in her eyes, before cutting to commercial. Around the studio, no one moved. The audience sat in silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The crew began to reset for the next segment, their motions mechanical, their faces pale, and as the shock began to ebb, one thought crystallized in everyone's mind. They had just witnessed television history. Lorraine Kelly had done the unthinkable, stood her ground against a prince, held him accountable for his words, and refused to be intimidated by his title, his anger, or his legacy. The interview was over, but its impact was only just beginning.